Hello, I'm Cole, this is Taylor, and welcome to Deep Cut. This is our first episode in our mini-series about film and how it impacts our society. In today's episode, we'll be reviewing the movie Seven Samurai and briefly going over the remakes that followed it. After that, we'll be discussing the whitewashing that occurred in those remakes and the history of whitewashing within Hollywood.
Now, starting with the movie, for those who may not know, Seven Samurai was made in 1954 and was directed by Kurosawa. Seven Samurai is about a village who is under attack by bandits, and the villagers request protection from a samurai in exchange for food. The samurai find 6 others to help teach the villagers how to defend themselves.
This movie is exceptionally long. It's set up almost like a play. There's an intermission in the middle, and the first act of it is really just all about the team of the samurai and the villagers. The villagers are panicking that the bandits are coming after them, and the samurai are trying to team up and get enough to defend the village. And the masterless samurai, they come and they work for food. They're literally fighting a war for a bowl of rice a day.
Seriously? Just a bowl?
Yeah, just a bowl of rice for each of them, which is a really, really terrible payment for, like, killing people on a near daily basis.
Yeah, and they're risking their lives.
For sure. And after all these samurai get picked up to fight for the village, they start teaching the villagers how to defend themselves. Initially, the villagers are just so afraid because they've been oppressed by samurai and the ruling class for so long, like, they just run away. These samurai are terrifying to them. This is their enemy.
They're scared of them, but they're asking them for help.
Yes, 100%. They're asking for help. It's really hard to figure out the dynamic initially. It's like they aren't friendly. It's like prey and a predator, and the prey just has to ask for help. And most of the beginning is still just training and trying to get the town ready.
And how are they training them?
Well, they were building up defenses, like making bamboo spears, getting helmets, arrows, like guerrilla warfare in order to fight off those bandits. Eventually, after this whole buildup, they're developing all the characters and trying to create bonds between samurai and the townspeople, and showing the individual personality of the samurais. It's most of that for probably the better part of 2 hours, and then this final huge hour-and-a-half long war at the end.
Jeez, I really can't believe that it's 3.5 hours long, especially since Harry Potter's I feel like it's always criticized that those are really long movies, but this one's, 3.5 hours long?
Yeah, it seems like a really difficult task to get an audience to sit down and watch a 3.5 hour movie. It's pretty impressive that Kurosawa was even able to make a movie this runtime in the 50s.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Just incredibly expensive. The main character in this movie is Kikuchiyo. He's the crazy samurai, the one you can tell he's not an officer, he wasn't a superior, he's definitely a lower class a little bit. He's just the wild man. He wants to go out and prove himself. The monk, the leader of the group, he shaves his head at the beginning. That he's this grizzled old man, and he doesn't want to. He's pretty reluctant to violence at this point. And then Katsuhiro, this very inexperienced samurai, he's please teach me. Just trying to get signed up.
Prove himself.
Yeah, he's really out there trying to prove himself. But his main role is to be the love interest in the movie with that farmer's daughter. And there's a very weird, reluctant relationship that's pretty depressing.
I know. It's sad that she'll never actually love him back, you know?
Right. At the very end of the film, she's working in that field. Everybody's all fine and dandy because they defeated the bandits. It's fine. And he's just looking at her so sad, like a puppy. He got kicked. And he's like, why doesn't she love me? And he has to leave. They get sent on their merry way. A bunch of them, 4 of them just died in this hour-and-a-half long battle. All the bandits and all the villagers, everyone, just so many emotions and all the movement. It's one of the biggest battles there had probably been on screen at the time. And Like they just get sent away after fighting for weeks for, food.
Tirelessly.
Yeah, tirelessly for like very little food a day. It's just go away. All right, bye.
And then like the last line that the samurai says at the end.
Right. We still didn't win. The farmers win in the end.
I know. That's so depressing.
We're always the losers. That's such a depressing, we're always the losers. That's a ridiculously depressing note to end a film on.
100%. Yes, you're right. And it's just so sad that after they kind of gotten to know each other throughout the film and they learn to care for one another, now they just have to leave and pretend like none of that even happened.
Right. They go there. They sacrifice like blood, sweat, and tears to help these people and just get brushed aside. And they have to go back to their lives as masterless samurai roaming the country. It's a very sad way to end a film, like with a lot of like honor and respect and
I know,
courage.
For nothing.
For nothing.
But the plot line of a village being under attack and the village finding a protector, that's been used countless times after this movie, don't you think?
Yeah, I feel like that's come up a lot in films since the 50s. And I think that the team-up aspect of the movie, I think that plays really well, let's say, high-profile movie, The Avengers. They have to go and get each member individually, or like Ocean's 11. Like, it's all about these team-up movies where they get like a huge cast of characters, and it never really happened before this. I think this movie really paved the way for that.
Oh, yeah.
Going off of that, actually, I saw a really funny video about comparing Seven Samurai to A Bug's Life.
A Bug's Life? The one
with
little ants and grasshoppers?
Yes, with the ants. Yes, it's insane, like some of the plot mirror. The story is almost exactly the same. Flick, the main character of The Bug's Life, is really similar to Rikishi, the villager sent off to find the samurai in Seven Samurai. There's invaders, which are the grasshopper. It's like the bandits. They're coming to take the food.
Those grasshoppers look so mean in that movie, by the way.
Right?
Yeah.
They were pretty scary. Like, when did that movie I don't know. I probably watched that movie when I was like 5 years old.
Yeah,
pretty scary.
Me too. Yeah, we'll have to put a picture of one of the grasshoppers. I know the leader in particular scared me so bad whenever I was a child.
He was so mean.
For no reason.
But there's nothing the villagers can do. They want to stand up to the bandits or the grasshoppers, and so the ant goes and finds the warriors, come back and help him defend his village. And all of these characters are they play the same kind of emotional roles. The ladybug is a lot like Kikuchio. He's the angry, lower one that gets along with the kids. And he just he's the first to the fight, but he plays really, really nice with the kids in the village. For Kikuchio in Seven Samurai and the ladybug in Bug's Life.
Oh my gosh.
And they just go back and forth. They set up an unlikely defense and they win. And there's just a lot of parallels to it.
There's I don't know if she's the queen ant or the princess ant. I don't know what she is, but the love interest in that movie, A Bug's Life, who was it?
Yeah. Oh, I can't remember her name. She was pink. She was a pink ant.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Now, it's so strange that Seven Samurai is so iconic, yet the remakes that came afterwards, I don't want to say that they're bad, but they certainly do not live up to Seven Samurai.
No, I agree with you. They're decent movies in themselves, but they're not Seven Samurai is a bona fide classic. The 1960 version of Magnificent Seven had a really big who's who of American actors at that time, just huge names taking on the main roles, kind of similar to the samurai. Yul Brynner is basically the monk samurai. He's the bald leader of the Magnificent Seven, and he's a little more reluctant to violence than everybody else. he got really big in Westworld. If you've seen the HBO show, it was
Yeah,
the
yeah.
original movie that that show is based off of the concept.
Oh, okay.
And then Steve McQueen, he's one of the biggest American movie stars of all time. Bullet is a huge classic. And then Charlie Bronson, who was one of the main action stars of the era as well. Like that, it's a pretty big who's who at early 60s American acting. Oh, and Eli Wallach as the main bad guy. He got really big in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He's the ugly. It's kind of funny that a Jewish guy always plays a Mexican villain in cowboy movies, but I mean, he's a great actor anyways, so.
And now that you pointed that out, that's actually our next topic for the podcast, which is whitewashing. And for those who may not know, whitewashing describes the habit of white actors playing non-white characters. So often, film companies will do this to shoehorn in a star, and sometimes they just do it straight out of racial insensitivity. And whitewashing actually has a pretty long history in Hollywood. It goes as far back as 1915. There's this movie called Birth of a Nation, and it depicts a town during the Civil War, and white actors play black characters as they have blackface on.
Yeah, and blackface is a pretty distasteful practice.
Yeah.
For those that don't know, it's when someone paints their skin to be darker. And according to CNN, white actors did this in minstrel shows. And along with darkening their skins, they would exaggerate their features and wear raggedy and poor quality clothes to look like a stereotypical black person.
Now, they did this to mock enslaved black people at the time, and they depicted them as lazy, ignorant, and hypersexual. And this was intended to make their white audiences laugh, but then and even now, blackface is completely racist and demeaning. And it's crazy that this still happens. I don't know if you've seen the movie with Robert Downey Jr., Tropic Thunder.
Tropic Thunder. I have seen Tropic Thunder.
So I looked up the summary of the movie, and it says that the movie is about a man who goes through pigmentation alteration surgery in order to play a black army officer. And that is completely distasteful. That is blackface for anyone who doesn't know. And Robert Downey Jr. actually was nominated for Best Supporting Role at the Oscars in 2009 for his role in that movie.
I mean, even in the parody role that he's supposed that was supposed to be meant in, it was still too distasteful. It's still you just can't do that.
Of course, you cannot.
Especially in 2009, that's crazy.
I know, that's ridiculous. In 1915, obviously, people there were slaves. Of course, they're going to do stuff like that. But in the 2000 era, I can't believe that that's still happening.
I mean, even in 1915, it's really bad. I know our country was in a lot worse place at the time, but it's still it's really bad.
Yeah.
But along with blackface, white actors have used Asian stage makeup and costuming, making white people play Asian people. It's referred to as yellow face, which, wow, that's a awful term. There's less examples of this recently in Hollywood, but it's more about leaving out people of color and having white actors take roles that should be meant for actors of color is still just absolutely rampant in Hollywood.
Yeah. For example, Seven Samurai, the original, is a Japanese movie played by Japanese people. However, the 1916 Magnificent Seven has white people play Mexican characters. And the movie even takes place in Mexico, yet the main roles are handed out to white people.
Right. I think, the movie itself, they tried to westernize it by, or make a westernized adaptation by taking away the samurai and replacing them with cowboys. But in 1960, not 67, my apologies, they didn't credit Kurosawa, even though shot by shot, it's a really similar film. The storyline is
Oh my
almost
gosh.
exactly the same. Like, there's direct dialogue translation.
That's
Like,
crazy.
like the last line, they literally say the exact same last line. The scene is exactly the same. I don't know how you can not credit a writer whenever you make a film not 10 years later, like absolutely mirroring his work.
Yeah. And the 2016 Magnificent Seven wasn't much better than the 1960. However, they did credit Kurosawa and they did add some diversity within the film, but I still don't think that was enough. And funny enough, in 2016, when Magnificent Seven, the most recent one, was released, that was the same year that the Oscars, for the second year in a row, had all 20 supporting and best roles given to. Wait, let me read this line. Was the same year that the Oscars, for the second year in a row, had all 20 best lead and supporting role nominees be all white. And I think that that's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. There's absolutely no reason to believe that the 20 best actors in the entire world are, and every single one of them are white. There's zero chance, no probability. I remember the hashtag, like, Oscars so white. Yeah, which they deserved that.
Yeah, 100%.
You'd think in, 2016, they would know that that's wrong. They're, like, the Hollywood... They pretend like they're the most awakened people there are, and they're just as bad as everybody else.
I know. And, but, let me see. But honestly, I bet it would be hard to nominate actors who aren't white because, quite frankly, a lot of the mainstream actors play the same big... Okay, there are many mainstream movies that are whitewashed, such as Ghost in a Shell, where Scarlett Johansson plays a Japanese woman. I don't know.
Right.
With that happening,
I don't know about that.
with whitewashing happening, it's no wonder that all the best actors are white because they're not giving any roles to people of color.
Right. When you try to make Scarlett Johansson, who is probably one of the highest paid female like actors in the world, and they're going to put her in this role that is literally a Japanese woman and she is white. And in every other adaptation of this story, it is still a Japanese woman, and we're going to get this this already wealthy, like very popular white lady to play her. And there's a lot of backlash about that, and I think it's warranted.
Rightfully so, yeah. But reeling it back to the films we were just discussing, the 2016 Magnificent Seven was whitewashed. However, like I said, I think they added a bit of diversity to the film.
I mean, they did. They added. I mean, it's a little performative diversity to me because they had one black guy, Denzel Washington, which great actor. Like, I was glad he was there, but and one Asian guy. That's still not enough representation.
Of course not.
Byung-hun Kim is like the one Asian guy, and it's like, oh, he's a Korean like knife thrower. So you give him a stereotypical like kind of role even within the movie when you're trying not to be stereotypical. And I get like retelling the story, but it's still mostly white guys in the Magnificent Seven. The Wild West, the whole genre has been whitewashed throughout decades. Recently, I watched a movie called Hell on the Border, which kind of was going against this. It was starring it was supposed to be the story of the first black U.S. Marshal, Bass Reeves. And it was pretty interesting. I get where they were trying to go with the story, and like I want to see those stories represented on screen. It's a good effort, but the movie just wasn't that great.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't help that much. And I just hate that because I want it to be pushed more towards what actually needs to be accomplished, you know?
Yeah, but like you said, cowboy movies, Western movies have been whitewashed, and it's almost like they're trying to make it seem like, people of color didn't exist during those times. And by doing that, it's almost like you're kind of erasing history. And The Atlantic wrote an article about whitewashing Western movies. And they explained that cowboy culture came to North America by Spanish colonists. And during the time, lots of cowboys were Spanish and their ranch hands were natives. And so they said that none of the cowboys then were white. And most recognizable cowboy fashion that we know today, such as lassos, bandanas, spurs, those were all Latino inventions. And it's kind of crazy.
The vaqueros.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy that Western movies, such as Magnificent Seven, the 1960 version, try to erase the fact that there were Spanish or people of color as cowboys.
Right. Another like really big example, I would say John Wayne movies. A ton of John Wayne movies are terrible about whitewashing. Like all of the main good guys are white. So, I mean, sometimes the bad guys are white too, but very often like minorities and people of color are most of the time if a person of color is a main character, they're a bad guy in his movies. The Searchers
what kind
specifically.
Of movies? Oh, okay.
The Searchers, one of his most famous westerns, like a very widely regarded like one of the best western movies of all time. All the good guys are white, and the Native Americans are like savages.
Oh my gosh!
They kidnapped his kid, and all like they just paint these people to look like the enemy, and they're trying to have like white people as like greater than thou, like be like just because they're white, they're not as evil. Everybody's just as bad as everybody else. Just being white doesn't make you a good person, and you know, a lot of film and movies have like a big problem with that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the last few lines about Westerns making white people the hero. Because I feel like if you're going to talk about whitewashing, you also have to talk about other damaging things Hollywood does, such as having a white savior or erasing people of color completely from a film, or writing people of color with no substance and only giving them stereotypical traits. Now, I heard of this movie called True Believer, and it's about a Korean American man who was wrongfully convicted of murder in San Francisco. Now, this movie was about his story, and I think that it's very odd that it's his story, but he was completely absent from the film. So this film...
Really?
Yeah. So this film was from the perspective of his lawyer, who happened to be white. And it was, I guess, kind of it was just him trying to save this Korean American man from these charges of murder. And
but he didn't even get to be in the movie.
Yeah, but
his character wasn't even in the film.
Yes, exactly. And that's a perfect example of a white savior. And there's other white savior movies, such as The Help and The Blind Side. You know, whenever I was researching this topic, I already knew The Blind Side was a white savior movie, but I wanted to look more into it. And the football player, his name's what? Michael Orr? Michael? Yeah. And he actually talked about that movie, and he said that he didn't like the way they made him. He didn't like the way they portrayed him, because he said he knew how to play football. He didn't need a white woman to teach him how to play football. He already knew. And so he was mad at how they portrayed him in that movie as someone who didn't know anything until a white woman came and saved him. You know,
I mean, I can see why that would be so offensive. Like, I mean, he went on to become a professional football player after that movie, and they're acting like he has no idea how to play the sport when he's in high school.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of a joke, and that Sandra Bullock has to teach him how to do it.
Southern Sandra Bullock.
Yeah. And to further explain to our audience, a white savior is the trope that white characters rescue non-white characters from like their troubles or their problems. Business Insider wrote an article about it, and they said that white saviors have been used since the beginning of filmmaking, but heavily utilized during the civil rights era, because during this time, black activists were fighting for civil rights in real life, and Hollywood was trying to use white people to tell black stories. And there's white saviors in, like you mentioned, The Help, Blindside, Freedom Riders, Hilary Swank, and Hidden Figures. Sorry, I specifically have a beef with Freedom Riders just because I feel like every school in America makes their kids watch that movie.
I have actually never seen that movie. I've seen
I've
all
seen
the
it
other
twice
ones.
in 2 different states,
Oh my gosh.
both in school.
Now, using these practices in film does damage society. You can't say that it doesn't because you're simplifying people of color and their struggles. And not only are you doing that, but by removing people of color from Western movies, you whitewash history, like I said. And when films whitewash their movies, they're taking away a part that could go to a person of color. And I'll rewind back to the Scarlett Johansson nonsense. But I love her, I like Black Widow. I've always liked Scarlett Johansson. But using the same actor and actresses in these movies are taken away from a person of color who could be cast as a person of color and not having a white person portray a person of color.
Right, like I agree. The whole point of representation is to give opportunities to people who need it, like that they deserve it. The color of your skin does not mean you should receive less or more opportunities than someone else. If you are good, you should receive the role. Like if you fit the role and you're good, you should receive the role. And it's sad, like giving these roles to people who aren't intended to play them. Like a requirement to play that character in Ghost of the Shell should have been be an
Japanese.
Asian woman. Yeah, be a Japanese woman, not ScarJo. And I just think just give it to somebody who needs it. There are so many like really, really talented actors of color that absolutely deserve a shot.
And I don't think that they're the only ones who deserve to have that part played by a person of color. I feel like it's really important to have representation because when people don't see people who look like them on screen, it can invalidate them. And it can show that they're... But whenever they do show a person of color on screen, it lets people who are watching know that their experiences are universal, that they're not the only one that this stuff is happening to. And you can't have a white person portray a person of color because they don't share the same struggles or experiences. And it is important to hear other people's stories and other people's perspectives about things. You can't just have the same person tell different stories because they don't actually know what it's like, For
sure. I think that it's really important for kids to see somebody that looks like them on
100%.
screen doing different things.
The Howard Journal of Communication published a study about the effects of negative portrayals of black men on television. And they stated that Anglo-Americans who have high exposure to negative portrayals of black people are more likely to make negative assumptions with black people. And they said that Anglo-Americans associated negative traits such as dishonesty, and being immoral with black people. And this not only affected how Anglo-Americans saw black people, but this also affected how black people saw themselves. And this is why whitewashing a cast is completely unacceptable because you are not... Okay, you go into the next line about diversity.
No, it's you're all good. I saw that study and I agree with you. Portraying black people as they do portray them very negatively.
Of course, yes, they do.
On TV. I feel like it's like there's a lot of, criminals or lack of education is like big tropes that happen within this or on TV. If a movie is more diverse, it will probably make more money in the United States.
Oh, yeah, I think so too. Just now that everyone's more aware of this whole issue and everyone is actually asking and practically begging for more diversity within Hollywood, I would assume that if there's a more diverse cast, it would be so much more successful in America.
Right, but a big part of why whitewashing is still kind of an issue is because the movies do a lot worse internationally if they're too diverse. Like overseas in China, makes like almost 40% less if there's like a person of color, like an
Jeez.
African
Oh my
American, that's
God.
a starring role.
That's crazy.
It's a very bad percentage, like of change in China if it's a black character versus a white character per se. And that's a terrible practice, but I think that's the reason why it goes about that way. It's not okay. It's the studios care about money. That's really what it comes down to, is that the dollar is the bottom line, and like these movies are going to make as much as possible. And so like they're even casting, like they're starting to cast better because they want to make more money, and they're like the people are asking for it. So they're like, I guess we'll do it now.
No, I agree that money is the biggest motivator to the studios rather than just doing right by the people that are being represented on the screen. Now, have you seen Crazy Rich Asians?
No, I actually haven't.
Okay, you definitely should. But that movie has an all Asian cast. And I looked it up, and the movie was applauded very much in the United States, as we just discussed. And I don't know if it was everywhere else, but I know definitely in the United States, everyone was so happy when this movie came out because it had so much representation. And the Times wrote that this was the first modern story with an all Asian cast in 25 years.
Really? That's ridiculous. I can't even believe that's a real stat. But I know that part of why that movie was so critically acclaimed was that it allowed so many different Asian actors to play roles that they like traditionally do not get to in American films. They got to play like every part of the family spectrum, like all the different roles. It's not just, oh, like here's the smart Asian in this movie. Like, no, this is a whole Asian family of different people that feel different ways with different personalities, and I think that's really cool. Like I'm gonna have to watch it. I realize this. I know that I've been putting it off.
Yeah. Well, although you haven't seen it, I highly encourage you to do so. It is it's a love story. It's just so good. And although you haven't seen that, I feel like you do have a lot of knowledge about Western movies. And I
have seen a lot. But my dad really dumped it on me as a kid because he really likes Western movies.
Yeah.
So we would often just he'd be working in the garage and just have like a VCR Western movie on a TV.
Yeah, I've never seen another Western movie besides Magnificent Seven, if you can count both of them as a Western movie. I don't know if you would. They kind of are, but
I would say so.
I saw Blazing Saddles that, wait, give me 1 minute. Yeah, I've seen Blazing Saddles, the satirical movie about the racial injustice of minorities within Hollywood in Western movies.
Yeah, I've seen that movie. It's definitely a product of the times.
Yes.
It would not really fly anymore. Like you can give it a little credit because the main character was a black sheriff in the Old West, but that's kind of about it. There's a lot of outdated ideals and stuff in that movie that isn't quite this. It was more about making fun of everything than like doing the right thing.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But there is some representation in it.
Yeah, there is some representation, but see, this is when I have the end, and I don't know if this would be a good. I feel like we need like two more things to say, and then we can say, okay, wrap it up.
Okay.
So, is it black?
What did I say?
Maybe talk about how the black.
We just need to do like a wrap up, kind of.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, because it's like stay tuned for our next episode. Like, we need to conclude our ideas.
Yeah. So, let's just. In conclusion, not trying to start this as an essay, but in conclusion, whitewashing has a very prevalent history in Hollywood films. And as we can see, whitewashing is still happening today. You know, the Scarlett Johansson movie came out, this year, last year?
Just a couple years ago. Not terribly long ago.
Yeah.
In the last 5 years, for sure.
Yeah, in the last 5 years, the Robert Downey Jr. blackface movie came out in 2008. He almost won an Oscar in 2009. So we can see that this problem isn't going to just go away anytime soon, but I definitely think that, it's not as prevalent as it was before.
There's a lot of work to be done, for
Yeah.
sure, but I don't think it's there's progress being made. Not all of it for the right reasons, but
Yeah, no.
hopefully Hollywood will actually get to the point where they are doing things for the right reason, and it's not just about money.
I don't know if that'll ever happen, but
probably not.
but I do
at least
hope,
we can hope for. Yeah.
I do hope that there is more diversity. I do hope that they start having more three-dimensional characters as people of color. Like, I want to see a three-dimensional Black person. I want to see a three-dimensional Hispanic person, because white people aren't the only people who have personalities and stories and traits. Lots of times they have, Hispanic people be, a cholo with freaking hey essay or something like that.
Yeah, it's just perpetuating stereotypes
Yes,
to
yes.
like a white audience. And, we're leading into that. Our next episode is going to be about discussing Black stereotypes within film. What movies will we be going over, Taylor?
We'll be going over Queen and Slim, The Help, which we kind of discussed today. And
But
we'll
much more in
also-
depth next time.
Yes, we'll also be discussing Hidden Figures, which is something we also kind of touched on today. But like you said, we'll go more in depth with it next episode.
And we'll be having a guest host, Tara, on giving her perspective on these films too. But to wrap it up, we'd like to thank Breadsword, Every Frame of Painting, The Atlantic, IMDb, Senses of Cinema, the Museum of Film History, and anybody else we might have forgot. Thank you.
Yeah,
We'll see you next time.
We made sure to sprinkle in who we were talking about and who we were quoting throughout the
We tried.
podcast.
We tried.
Yeah. But thank you so much. Stay tuned.